My name is Stephen Barstow, and I've lived in this house in Malvik in Trøndelag since 1984. So it's over 40 years I've lived in this garden now. And this is only the second time I've given this talk, the first time in English. The first time was in Trondheim at the beginning of May. And the idea here was to talk, usually I talk about my favourite topic of perennial vegetables. This time perennial vegetables will be a part of it, but I'll be talking about my favourite forest garden plants, which I've had experience with over the years. So both perennial vegetables, but also trees and shrubs. So this is one of my favourite shots from below the garden, looking up into the garden at the diversity of trees and shrubs. This is an elderberry, laciniata, sort of formed with dissected leaves. This is another elderberry, Black Beauty. This is staghorn sumac or Hjorte sumac. So chestnut. This is a Cornus kusa or a kusa dogwood, Japan. What's it called now? No, never mind. In Norwegian, this is a Manchurian walnut. Up here we have wild hazel and a mulberry. So there's a big diversity there in this small part of the garden, but there we're concentrating mainly on the trees and shrubs with edible parts in my garden. This is an overview of the garden from above, taken some years ago, showing the house and the garden, and you can see very well the diversity of plants. At this time there were probably about 2,000 edible plants in my garden. So I have something called collectomania, probably heard of. My dad collected stamps, so I collect edible plants of the world. And at the top I had about 2,000 I was looking after, so it was kind of an ethno-botanical garden. And over the years it's become recognised also as a forest garden, even though I didn't know anything about the concept of forest gardening. I had created a forest garden, it seemed, because I had created this garden of edible plants and basically copied nature and was cultivating the plants where I'd read they would grow well. Some shade lovers, some sun lovers, etc. Just a quick overview of a forest garden. I'm sure you've seen this. This isn't a talk about how to forest garden. It's about the plants which you can use over most of Norway in a forest garden. Variously in Norwegian called Spiselige Skoghageplanter. In English, forest garden, food forest are the most common terms. And basically, this illustration. Oh yeah. This illustration basically shows the various layers in a forest garden. You've got these large trees. Walnut would be an example. Smaller trees like apple trees and things like that. And below you've got the currant bushes. And in the herbaceous layer you've got various perennial vegetables and also ground cover plants. And basically you can integrate anything in a forest garden. You often have a sunny side of a forest garden where you can also grow conventional annual crops, if you like. You could have a pond there, you could have beehives, bee hotels, integrate, make a lovely living natural system. So how did my garden become a forest garden, even though I didn't know what the concept was? I thought I'd just explore this first before we get into the plants. Basically, when I was a young man, I became interested, when I was a student in Edinburgh, became interested in nature and alternative things, if you like, and I've become interested in particular in birds, learning the names of birds and plants. And when I moved to Norway in 1981, and bought the house eventually in '84. We wanted a house where there would be a good diversity of birds in particular. And we discovered this house for sale, and it had a lovely view of the fjord, but importantly for me, there was wild hazel growing there, which indicated a good diversity of birds like woodpeckers, nuthatches, and as it turned out, nutcrackers and squirrels, of course. And over the years then, we've recorded over 100 species of bird just in my garden, or flying over the garden. Okay, so that was the starting point was this young guy who was interested in nature, and at the same time I'd become vegetarian in Scotland, and I moved to a country where it seemed that vegetables were illegal. We looked for a long time for the grønnsaksmonopol, but it didn't exist, so we had to really start. I had actually a student garden in Edinburgh, just a small one, so I had the rudimentaries, and I'd actually become a member of the biggest organic organisation in the UK. So just rolled up my arm sleeves and started growing our own food. My inspirations, important just to say something about that. There was this database called Plants for a Future in the early 90s with information of over 7,000 plants and their uses, which it was actually put together by a bus driver in London who got fed up with driving buses, moved out to the country, and started cataloguing the world's edible plants as well as growing them. So he put together this amazing database, which he sent me in the early 90s on a set of 10 of these old diskettes, which I still have, but I can't read them anymore. Anyway, so 7,000 plants on this database. Wow, I had no idea there was this diversity of plants. And I also learned that most people didn't have more than 20 in their lifetime. You know, it's huge diversity. And then I traveled a lot. I worked as an ocean wave climatologist. I worked as kind of an oceanographer, meteorologist, and traveled the world for work and to conferences, etc. And I remember I was in Seattle in North America and bought this book, which I found just randomly in a bookstore, Sturtevant's Edible Plants of the World, a book written in 1920 by an American professor who who'd also catalogued the world's edible plants and made this, and this book was put together after his death in 1920. And it's not a book with pictures or anything, it's just facts about how botanical species were used around the world and how they were domesticated and how they saved lives and all this stuff. And there were many really interesting stories in this book, which fascinated me. And then a bit later on, I came across this book, Cornucopia 2, which became my Bible of edible plants, a source book of edible plants, which also has about 3,000 species. And again, descriptions, no pictures, it's not an identification guide. And as you can probably see, this was the first one I bought. This one here now looks like this one. So it really looks like one of these old-fashioned telephone catalogues with small letters and masses of information. Hugely important, just randomly finding these books in bookstores and then coming home and reading about the plants and discovering that some of these plants that were mentioned I already was growing in my garden. In 1984, we bought this house and garden, and it already had a number of ornamental plants in it. So it was a kind of, wow, that's edible, you know. It's so over the years, all these kind of surprising discoveries turned out. And most of the plants, most of the ornamentals I'd inherited, of course, were perennial plants. And most of the vegetables most people grew, and I was growing at that time, were annuals. And I didn't bother with seed saving at the time, which happens in year 2 for most traditional vegetables. You overwinter the roots and then grow them on in year 2 and produce the seed. Anyway, so this, just to cut a long story short, with my collectomania and this big collection of edible plants, and reading about the world's edible plants, in particular the work done by so-called ethnobotanists, botanists that work on the interaction between people and plants, and in particular the Mediterranean diet, which was discovered some 30, 40 years ago. And ethnobotanists got money at the time to try and find out what the hell these people have been eating to keep themselves so in good form with little cardiovascular disease. And when I was reading these papers describing this, it was really the diversity of the diets which was the most important thing. Over the years, just in the Mediterranean countries, they've documented over 3,000 species of plants which were used traditionally for food. Huge diversity. And in addition to that, they discovered that they would make these multi-species dishes, particularly in the springtime. They would go out into nature and into their vineyards, they would go into their gardens, and they would collect as many different species as they could. And made these multi-species dishes, often with over 50 different ingredients. And this was, I believe it was a way of keeping knowledge on edible plants alive in the community. So the children, the younger people would go out with grandmother and learn, when collecting all these plants, what was edible. So in the bad times, in particular, they would know. That knowledge would be passed on from generation to generation. And this gave me the inspiration to start making these salads, which culminated in this world record in salad diversity, which still stands from 2003, where I made a salad with 537 ingredients grown in my garden in Malvik. So there was a real story behind it. It wasn't just me trying to show off how many plants I could put in a salad. Guinness weren't interested, which I was a bit disappointed at the time, but Guinness wrote back saying that, sorry, we don't have a category for this. Why don't you make a salad with 1 ton of lettuce leaves? Then we're interested. So for me, then I realized that the Guinness record book was all about greed. Fattest possible or biggest possible cake, whatever. So I was quite glad I didn't get. For many years, I tried to find an organic brewery. Guinness is a brewery, to make a record book of records which actually have a sustainable meaning, if you see what I mean. But that search has still not ended. Maybe one of you as a brewer would like to start that. Yeah, maybe, yeah. Anyway, so over the years we've made all these nice-looking diversity salads that food can look really, really good, and you can do this at home. You don't need to be a gourmet restaurant. You don't need to go to a gourmet restaurant and pay thousands of kroner to buy this kind of food. In fact, you can't buy this kind of food there. And then my own diet, Barstow's diet, 80 a day, keeps the doctor away. And that's interesting because I was joking, of course, originally 80 a day, but we're now up to 30. There was some nutritionist in Florida recently that was suggesting 30 a week. Yeah, now we're beginning to speak. So who knows, maybe we'll get up to 80 eventually. I don't often have 80 in a day, but probably 60 in a week is a possibility, and on occasions these monster salads. Okay, so yeah, if you're interested, those who are watching this on YouTube or wherever this is going to be put eventually, there's a link at the bottom left to all the ingredients in my monster salad from 2003, just in case you were interested in that. See that handsome guy there? This big salad I made in 2003 led to me appearing on Grønn Glede in our core gardening program in 2004. And it's just a little clip from there. And this is still available on our core if you're interested in seeing a Czech man talking about his edible plants. And it also led to a series of articles on my edible garden and Spiselige Hagen being published in 3 numbers of Norsk Hagetiden in March, April and May 2005, which I just miraculously, they kind of appeared in my house. I've been searching for them for years. And when I was preparing this talk, I thought I'd just have another quick look if I could find them, because I never made a scan of the articles. And there they were, right at the top of a pile. How on earth they got there, I don't know. Anyway, so it's interesting in retrospect. So, publicity. So I was on the national TV, and I was in the National Gardening magazine. And when the journalist came to interview me, she asked me if I was doing permaculture. And I said, but I kind of knew what permaculture was, but I'd never met any. We were part of the organic gardening campaign in Norway. There were about 40, 50 gardens across the country. We had an open day every year, and that was when we made this monster salad. And so when for some reason, I never met people who were doing permaculture. And there was the Norwegian Permaculture Association, which was formed in 1990. Our ways didn't cross. The internet wasn't so strong at that time, so we didn't really, I didn't know about this. And she sent me an email and asked this, and I thought about it, and I looked up on the net. Yeah, that's kind of what I do. I source everything locally, and my garden's mainly perennials, and I'm kind of doing permaculture. So I said, yeah, I guess I'm doing permaculture. Well, could you define it, she said. And I had no idea, so I contacted Permaculture Vern and asked if they could give me a definition. And a certain Jan Bang, who was the leader, and has been a leading light in permaculture in Norway over the years, answered me and sent me a definition, which was actually published in the magazine. One of the articles even had a map of my garden, which I also have been searching for years. I didn't know where that had been published. So I found this just yesterday as well. Looks very neat and tidy. It's nothing like that. It really is an ecological wilderness at the moment, or deliberately. And another one in the April number were my favourite April vegetables, including Hablitzia tamnoides, stjarnemelde, and this is a onion, Allium obliquum, the twisted leaf garlic, and a number of schools and error is in there as well. Perennial veg was the main focus in the article, and this is the definition of permaculture, which Jan Bang had given me. So that put me in touch with the Permaculture Association, and from then, just a month later, Jan Bang was touring Camp Hill sites, and there's one in Malvik where I live, at Jøsåsen, and he asked if he could stop by for a chat. So he popped by, and that kind of led to a 10-year collaboration, which I ended up. This is an advert for the PDC here at Hurdal in 2018 that we talked about a little bit outside. this thing not working either now? Is the battery gone or something? No, no, it can't be.
It's this one.
No, I mean...
oh, the zapper?
No, I was just trying to... The pointer. There it is, yeah. Yeah, so this was this is me and Jan Bang. First of all, I did a PDC together with him. This was my own PDC, which the Permaculture Association wanted my garden to be part of the Land network, which is this international network of permaculture gardens that people can visit and get inspiration from. But you had to have a PDC to be part of this network. So the solution was that a PDC would be organised at my place with Jan Bang, and I would teach myself the vegetable part. Anyway, so that was the first one. The year after, here, I did another one here at Hurdal in this room. And at lunchtime, I gave a lunchtime talk here, which was also open to the people in the eco-village, about my perennial vegetables. And I talked a lot about this guy, Frederick Schubler, who was the leader of the botanical garden in Oslo in the 1800s for 20, 30 years. And he, for me, was the most important person in Norway for the introduction of food diversity in particular. He travelled quite widely and brought plants back to Norway, tested them, and he established this network of rectory gardens, Prestegårdshage, across the country and he got the priests to test out new plants and report back. In this way, he worked out, in particular, the northern limit of perennial plants in Norway. And it's quite astonishing to look up his works. So you can search on Nasjonalbiblioteket, the National Library of Norway, and search for different plants. And it's astonishing to see how many what we think of as unusual vegetables he already knew about. For example, a good example is Patience Doc Rumex Patientia, Hagesura in Norwegian. And he wrote a book on vegetable gardening, and he writes in this book that this particular plant, Hagesura Rumex Patientia, was so common in Finnmark, being grown as a perennial vegetable in the 1850s, that it was totally unnecessary for him to describe how you grew it or how you used it in the kitchen. Quite astonishing. When I read that, I looked up on a Facebook group, Gardening in Northern Norway. Not a single mention of this vegetable. So had totally disappeared from use. And it's a fantastic perennial vegetable too. So why has this happened? It's an interesting question. But he knew a lot. And this, so I talked about that one and several other anecdotes related to Schubler. And at that time, KVANN had just been established, the Norwegian seed saver organisation. And we'd actually started, we organised ourselves according to so-called guilds or laug. And we had a Prestegård laug with an idea of connecting all the Prestegård in Norway that was still growing interesting plants. And somebody called Ragnhild put up her hand and said, why don't we do the same as Schubler and set up a network of rectory gardens, Prestegårdshage in Norway, to do the same kind of thing. It's just as important today as it was in Schubler's time. It all has to do with food security. Why don't we establish this? Not only food security, but also taking care of old varieties of ornamentals and fruit trees and berries, etc. So that was really that in 2018, during my talk in Hurdal, thanks to Ragnhild, the idea of a network, Spiselige Hage, which you guys are part of a network today of about 60 inspiration gardens, many of them old rectory gardens. So that happened here. Yeah, it was under the PDC that this happened. And also during that same PDC, it was actually, when we were here in 2018, it was the 15th anniversary of my world record salad. It happened on that particular day. So the participants made this Biodiversity salad from out in the garden here with the numbers 15 in flowers. I don't know if you can see that. That was quite interesting. Anyway, over the years, and because of this contact with permaculture, and the Permaculture Association wrote about me and my garden, that people should visit it. I started getting a lot of visitors who were permaculturists. And when they came down onto the steepest slope in my garden, where I have, which to me is the most productive part of my garden. I don't know if you can see up here, in about late 80s, early 90s, I made a wall. I spent the whole summer building this wall by hand to make a flat area, to terrace part of the garden in order that I could grow annual crops, because that's the way you do it, isn't it? On flat ground, not on a steep slope. And today it's very ironic that on the flat part it's not very productive, but the most productive part is the steepest slope, because the perennials, and this is the virgin soil in the garden, which is very, very fertile, and the perennials stabilize any erosion that's going to happen. So that was interesting. So this part of the garden, I remember these permaculture people coming down this steep slope and saying, "Wow, you've got a forest garden." Oh, have I? Yeah, I suppose I have. I knew about the concept, but yeah, it had been what I've been doing all the years. So in this little part of the garden here, I won't read out all the different perennials which are growing there. Come back to some of them later. But the most impressive of the vegetables on that particular part of the garden is this Udo, Aurelia cordata. Andrew has a smallish version, but it's growing in his garden outside. It literally explodes in the springtime. So it's a herbaceous perennial which dies back to the ground every autumn. I take away the stems for compost, and otherwise I don't do anything. And it's the same with practically all the perennials in my garden. I don't do anything, and particularly in this area, it's a pretty stable ecosystem, which isn't changing discernibly from year to year, and has something like 30 important crops that I'm harvesting. But the king of them all is this Udo plant, which we'll come back to. This also, contact with permaculture, led me to be talked about in the UK, and I was invited to write articles for UK Permaculture magazine. In 2008, there was this article about the oriental perennial spinach, about hosta, the most common ornamental plant in the world that still hadn't been discovered in Europe as one of the most productive and nutritious perennial vegetables, or vegetables of any kind that you can grow. A plant that can even grow on the north side of your house where there's absolutely no sun and still produce nutritious food. I'll come back to that. So this was a series of articles published, one on extreme salads in Permaculture magazine in the 2000s. But before that, and actually before about the time of the first, I made the first world record was in 2001 with about only 337 plants. I started writing also for Sopa Nytteplanter. This was an article about ostrich fern in 2002, 23 years later, it's become quite popular as a vegetable. In fact, I don't lead foraging tours anymore because of over-harvesting, particularly around cities. So I rather advocate growing. The same with ramsons. Grow it, don't destroy the wild stands. We might really need it one day. I started giving what became this talk, Around the World in 80 Plants. This was the title of the first one I did in 2006 for the Botanical Society in Trondheim. And that was a bit awe-inspiring, all these botanists. I'm not trained at all as a biologist, but I did it, and after the talk, the leader said, "You should really write a book about this, all these stories around the plants," which ended in my book being published in 2014 through Permanent Publications, the same people that put out Permaculture magazine in the UK. So I basically compressed in this book from the thousands of edible perennial vegetables that I've grown in my garden over the years. I selected my top 80. And that, 80? Really? That many? Yeah, there are many. I could do a talk on 80 alliums, no problem. 80 onions. There's so many interesting. And and when you're talking about seasonal food, the perennial vegetables, there are different alliums, which, as you started talking about, there are different alliums that you harvest at different seasons. You can cut and they come again. You can use the different parts of the plant, the young shoots, you can use the bulbs, you can use the flower stems, the scapes, and the flowers. So it's quite possible, and I've been self-sufficient in vegetables and fruit and berries for many years in that way, eating seasonally and not actually using any techniques like fermentation. I don't own a freezer, and so it's fresh food year round. But I'm lucky that I've got an old house with a good cold cellar for storage. Okay, starting with enough about my story. That's the first time I've told that as well, so it was interesting to put together. So, if we start at the bottom and look at some of the plants, so-called Boondekkere ground layer plants. One of my absolute favourites is the Virginia waterleaf hydrophyllum. Hydrophyllum, the genus Hydrophyllum, literally means hydro, water, and phylum, leaf. And it has to do with the young leaves often have a kind of a white kind of watermark at the bottom. Difficult to see in that photo. But it's also known as Indian salad, because the Native Americans in eastern North America, also in western North America with the different species, used it as a, yeah.
Do you mind just dropping the name in Norwegian if you know it?
Okay.
That's because many of the names in English I don't know, but I know them in Norwegian.
Sorry, would I say the...
If you just can say the word in Norwegian also when you start talking about
you okay. Is that okay if I say it in Norwegian as well? Yeah, okay. Yeah, so this one is called vassblad in Norwegian, or waterleaf. And it gradually creeps outwards, and it has lovely flowers as well, so it's a lovely combination plant in that way. And of course we've got ground elder, which we all love. And in fact, my whole garden was covered in ground elder when I started. And ground elder does not compete with big perennial plants at all. In fact, it complements them in that you can harvest both. Squalacall, yeah, sorry. Yeah, of course you can't see the red here, so it's apologise for that. And I would today actually plant squalacall in my garden if I hadn't already had plenty of it. So we eat squalacall practically every day in small amounts, not large amounts, but small amounts. In practically everything from salads to stir fries to pizza to egg pie, whatever. And there's also this variegated version, Brocketbladet Skvallerkål, which Andrew actually has out the back here, Andrew and Marlin, which is rather a nice one, which is cultivated in woodland gardens around the world. And we have our own Facebook group, Friends of Ground Elder, Skvallerkål and Svenne, which in its time, about 15 years ago, was an anti-Monsanto Roundup group. But there's a lot of good stuff there. Then some of the shade-tolerant vegetables, the herbal layer, just a quick overview to start with. We've talked about hosta, rumsens, ramslurk, of course, giant bellflower, storklocke, ostrich fern, strutzeving, victoryoungen, saeslurk. They're all shade-loving perennial vegetables that I grow in my forest garden. Starting though with hosta, just a bit more details about the queen of edimentals, the oriental perennial spinach, when I first wrote about it. In Japan, Korea and China, many of our ornamental plants originate in this part of the world, and many of them, probably about a third of them, are edible plants as well, important edible plants in other parts of the world. And Japan in particular is one of the world's biodiversity hotspots with almost 2,000 endemic plants which are only found in Japan. And as I mentioned, many of which we already grow as ornamentals. And there are rich foraging traditions as well, from which the edibility inspiration comes from. In Japan, foraged vegetables are called sansai, and in Korea, sanamul. And these words literally mean mountain veggies, vegetables that were harvested from nature in the mountain areas. People have moved from the mountain villages and moved into the cities, which are becoming bigger and bigger. And because of this, they remember that there's a demand for this sansai vegetables, which they remember the good taste of the wild foraged food. And so a whole industry of sansai production has cropped up around the big cities. And I was lucky to be invited to a study tour to Japan in 2016. This was after my book came out, to visit some of the farms that were producing sansai vegetables. Unfortunately, we didn't get to see a hosta farm, but I'll show some pictures in a minute from that. Yeah, and about 1/3 of all plant species in the world, it turns out, have been used for food in some way. Some in what I call the emergency food category, but many are really top-notch food plants. So there are maybe 100,000 species of wild plants in the world which have been used for food, yet we probably don't use, as a species, more than about 90 in the whole world. So a very small percentage. But as gardeners, we can do this. And here I'm calling hosta the king of the edimentals. Definitely a queen, isn't it? It's not a king. So hosta, and many people know about hosta. You can call it a bladlilje, also in Norwegian. But these are large, particularly the larger ones. There are miniature ones as well, but the larger ones are the ones we're interested in for food. I haven't really discerned any big difference in taste. It's a very mild, sweetish taste. And the best time to take the young shoots is before the leaves unfurl, but you can also use the older leaves. And you can use the flower stems, the flowers you can use in salads. And in Japan, they blanch the young shoots, which they call literally hosta icicles. Just move on. And this was from a supermarket. All the supermarkets in Japan had hosta for sale in these vacuum-wrapped plastic.
Can you eat all types of hosta?
Yeah, there's no known poisonous hosta.
Yeah.
So just taste your way and find one that you enjoy the taste of. But as I say, I haven't really noticed any big difference in the taste. So in my own garden, I basically put a bucket over the plant early in the springtime. And when the bucket is thrown off the plant, then it's ready to harvest. And you get these white, which are literally used as a salad in Japan. I think I've got a picture of it. So this is a hosta farm in Japan, where they basically grow hosta on large fields on a big scale. Not very permaculture, but it's interesting to see what they do. And in the autumn, they dig up the huge roots of these plants and pile them high like this. And this is an area of Japan in the mountains where there's a lot of snow. So very quickly, these piles get covered in a deep layer of snow, which preserves them. And they basically take a few of these roots, move them into these glass houses, and they cover the roots with rice husks, which is a cheap commodity for literally excluding the sunlight from the emerging plants. And and then I was invited to this is the first time we ate hosta. We basically replaced spinach with hosta in a spanakopita, a Greek spinach pie recipe. And it was delicious. Not much difference in taste to spinach, except that it was available at that time in spring, whereas my spinach had gone to seed, which is difficult to grow in Trøndelag, where we have these long days. We also made hosta sushi, so the green here is cooked hosta, and many other recipes. And this is from a Japanese family who invited us home to show us how they prepared these various sansai vegetables. So it was basically a dipping sauce. It was quite sweet, actually, but sesame oil, roasted sesame seeds, soy sauce mix. Just dip them in, and it's delicious. Udo, we've talked about, my giant vegetable. It's the young shoots again, which is the main product. Again, I cover with a large bucket. The taste is a bit stronger when it's green. So putting one of the bigger builder's buckets over the plant before the shoots emerge in the springtime, and just watching the bucket. When it's lifted up and thrown off the plant, then it's ready to harvest. And you basically peel the outer layer of Udo and make a salad from it, again with a dressing of some kind. Delicious, what I call fast, slow food. And the what you could call broccolis, the unopened flower heads of Udo, are also delicious. Mainly used in tempura or tempered vegetables in the Far East. And I was lucky as part of this study tour to Japan, to visit one of the farms that was producing underground grown Udo. So basically they grow these huge herbaceous plants in open fields, and then they dig up the whole plant, the roots, in the winter, and move them underground into these special caverns. This is in western Tokyo, where these old traditional farms had still survived. And I'd read about this years before and always wanted to try and visit one, which was really difficult to get permission, not knowing Japanese, but thanks to a member of KVANN who knew Japanese, who contacted the municipality where these farms were located and gave us permission. But we had to have an interpreter with us, and another member of KVANN knew somebody that came down from a mountain village and helped us interpret. And it turned out the farmer told us that we were the first Europeans that had asked and been on such a tour. Really fascinating. So vegetable tours of the world, big new tourist attraction. But it really was fascinating. There were a few Americans who were living in Tokyo who also took part, who never knew about this, even though they lived there. Anyway, so that was a great day. There are other Aralias. This is the ginseng family, Aralia racemosa, or hosta aralia, or Stauda aralia, is a species from North America, which can be used in the same way. Also delicious. There are various, in the Far East, they love their asters, or the daisy family, the compositae. This is one of the favourite Korean perennial sanamul mountain vegetables. Aster scaba, it used to be called, which is cultivated on a big scale in greenhouses. They dry the leaves and then export the leaves to Korean supermarkets around the world. I've seen them in Korean supermarkets in North America. A delicious spring vegetable, at the same time a fantastic ornamental in my September garden. So I love these combination plants. There are other asters around the world, like the North American bigleaf aster, which is an important Native American spring vegetable. We don't really hear about the vegetables of the Native Americans or the vegetables of the Sami people, but of course they ate vegetables. And this was one of the most important ones on the east coast of North America. Another one in the Asteraceae is Korea Nytteplanter, or Korean Ligularia fisheri. There are many species of Ligularia, many of which are grown as ornamentals in our gardens, but I only recommend this one as a food plant, which you can get through KVANN, and it's literally the king of the wild foraged vegetables in Korea, and has these rather large leaves, as you can see. You see these the yellow flowers, which are typical for Ligularia Nytteplanter, and and from a cultivation of this plant in Korea, again a very big industry now to serve the demand in the big cities, and they are used both as a vegetable but also as a wrap around food. In Korea they always eat the wrap raw in addition to the what's being wrapped, and you can see it's a nutritious vegetable served up with spices and sesame oil. So, and grows exceedingly well in Norway. And then we have Mitsuba. You may have grown it, at least the green Mitsuba is often available in vegetable catalogues in Europe as they sometimes call it Japanese parsley, Japan persille, but Mitsuba is probably the best name. It's not really a parsley, it doesn't really taste like that. But it's perennial, again, comes back year after year. And I particularly like the purple variant you can see here, which also looks good in the vegetable garden. And this is the North American, this is the Cryptotania genus in the carrot family. Cryptotania canadensis is a woodland plant in North America used by the Native Americans, has a very similar taste. Ostrich fern, we've talked about a bit. I no longer, as I mentioned, lead foraging tours, but encourage you to have it in your garden. You have a nice stands already here at Hurdal at the Gjestegård. But Strutseving is the only recommended edible fern in Norway. In North America, there are over 1,000 tons of it harvested from nature every year. Extremely important food plant, and highly nutritious as well. I'll go on. And often I see it in big gardens being grown as an ornamental as well, because these big ferns in the summer just look amazing. This is the distribution in Norway. And in a supermarket in Japan, because it has this more or less global distribution in the northern hemisphere. And yeah, very important vegetable also over there. Yeah, and here from a botanical garden where you can see it planted in a kind of a woodland setting. Another one that Andrew and Marlin have in the garden here is what we call sombadi, or the Kjempeselleri from a small island, Uleångsdo, which lies between Korea and Japan. And it's an endemic to that very small island. And in recent years has become quite popular in gardening circles, not edible gardening circles, but traditional ornamental gardeners, in particular in Sweden and in North America, have been using this. But it turns out also to be a fantastic perennial veg, which actually is often harvested in the middle of winter. So under the snow, often you can harvest the green leaves, so it stays like that all winter. So it's a nice supplement in winter. There are a few plants you can dig up from your garden in the winter months, and super popular with the pollinating insects as well. Daylilies, along with hostas, the most used ornamental plants in the world, but also looking at the numbers, one of the most important vegetables in China, which is a very high population, so probably used by more people than most traditional annual vegetables. And we know that it's been cultivated in China for over 3,000 years. You can use both the young shoots, but for me, in particular, the flower buds, fantastic in stir-fry dishes, really tasty. You can use a few flowers in salads, and in China in particular, where they grow on a large farm scale, they will collect the withered flowers. The reason we call it daylily, it flowers for 1 day or 2 days, and then the flowers wither. They then collect and dry the withered flowers, and they use them as a kind of a soup ingredient in the winter months. So you can have the beauty and still to enjoy the beauty in addition to the harvest. And this is.
You say you could eat before because they're potentially a little bit toxic.
Yeah, I should have said that. Yeah, if you eat 40 flowers or something like that, you're likely to get upset stomach. So don't overdo the flowers with daylily. Cooked, it's all right, but raw, you should be a bit careful. So this is a Taiwanese daylily farm. This could be at Herdal. That's your next challenge. It would look so beautiful. Tourists would come all over the world to see the first European daylily farm. You convinced?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And this is from the botanical gardens at Tøyen in Oslo, where they've planted snacks for the public. And from Japan, like it grows in nature. So these are the young green shoots covering this whole area of daylilies, a particular species. Kiss me over the garden gate. No, thank you. But this is one of the most important vegetables of the Cherokee Native Americans in eastern North America, in the Appalachian Mountains in particular. The young shoots of what is probably Norway's most popular garden ornamental, which we've been growing in Norway since around about 1900, is also an exceptional nutritious vegetable. Often a farm would have only this plant as an ornamental growing next to the gate. It's also known as sochan, which is the Native American word. Jara solhat, kyss mig over jare, heter det på norsk. Fantastic, productive. If you think of it as a vegetable, it's an amazingly productive plant. It's the young shoots, young shoots you can use as a vegetable. As I say, the Cherokee people in the Appalachian Mountains, in particular, I think it was the big Smoky Mountain Nature Reserve in South Carolina, I think it is. Since they established this big Smoky Mountain National Park, the Native Americans have not been allowed to harvest food in this park. And just about 5 years ago, finally, they've been given permission again, because scientists have discovered that actually the Native Americans were part of their ecosystem, believe it or not. And they were actually, because they were harvesting this plant in a sustainable way, when they harvested it, it would make the plant or stimulate it to flower and produce seed. Without them, it was a bit different. So finally, I remember reading online the decision and how the local Cherokee was so overjoyed to be able to harvest this plant once again. They also harvested nettles and a number of other dandelions, a lot of the commonly forage plants that we know, but this one is particular to North America. But it's found its way around the world as an ornamental as well. And actually this is just preparing it, but also in Korea, in the mountains in Korea, this North American species is now being cultivated on farms as a vegetable. Again, this is a plant in the aster family, and they love the taste, the aromatic taste of the leaves of plants in this family, and have started growing this perennial vegetable on a farm scale, which is really cool to read. Yet in North America, it's still just the Native Americans that are harvesting it from the wild. And then we've got storklokke. These are all plants which are perennials growing in the lower layers of a forest garden, okay? So we're still down there. Shade-loving plants, all of these. A giant bellflower is another one, which is a favourite of mine, storklokke in Norwegian, which is also beautiful when it's flowering, with these white or purple flowers. My own garden was totally covered with this, along with the ground elder squalacor when we moved in. I spent a lot of time trying to remove it until I discovered that it was known that in the 1500s the farmers around Trondheim harvested large amounts of the greens in the springtime after the long winter to make soups with. So it was an old tradition that disappeared long ago. But throughout the world, the Campanula genus and the Campanulaceae in general, the bellflower family, have been used as food plants. And the young leaves are delicious, slightly sweet tasting, great in salads and all sorts of other dishes. And the roots can also be eaten. So here you have a forest garden plant where you can get some carbs as well. Hablitzia tamnoides. Now we're on to climbing plants in a forest garden. Of course, some will climb up into the trees above them, and one of them is Hablitzia tamnoides, the Stjarnemelde Caucasian spinach. And this is a really productive, probably my favourite. If I was asked to name just one, I was only allowed to take one perennial veg onto my desert island. it would probably be this one. Because but I'd have to have the right climate for it on this desert island, of course, which I probably wouldn't have, but that's another another matter. But it's amazing in the sense that it's another one that you can harvest even in winter. The young shoots start forming in the autumn and grow very slowly over the winter, totally hardy, can take down to 25, minus 25. You can read a lot more about Ablitsia tamnoides in my book and also in on my blog, which is edimentals.com. Can use it just like spinach or in salads. And yeah, another one, which some of you might not know about, are the young shoots of hops being here in a market in Venice in Italy, being sold as a vegetable harvested from nature or cultivated, and a very tasty the young shoots, but they grow very quickly in the springtime. You have to be pretty quick to collect them. And don't worry, you'll still get the hops for brewing if you're into that. Okay, I mentioned outside the Onion Garden Chicago at the Ringve Botanical Garden in Trondheim. So when I took early retirement in 2017, actually the same year, I was asked if I would be interested in creating this garden because I'd worked for over 10 years for the Norwegian Genetic Resource Centre in collecting old Norwegian onions from all over the country. One of the few perennial vegetables that were traditionally grown in Norway were onions of various types. There were plants, there were onions like chives that we saw outside. There was Welsh onion. There were many different onions, about 10 different species altogether, which I collected. Altogether about 80 different plants from different parts of Norway, all the way from Lindesnes to Nordkapp. So this garden was put together today, over 400 different alliums and over 100 botanical species. So I thought I'd just talk a little bit about, and I did mention, I think, outside the reason that we call it Chicago, because Chicago in Native American language actually means stinking place in the woods, the place where the onions grew. So it's become known as the Onion Garden Chicago. So a few of the onions growing there, which are also good forest garden plants. We have the Victory onion, which is naturalized in a big way in the Lofoten Islands, Seierslurk in Norwegian. It's not a native, as I mentioned. It has a wild distribution all the way from the Pyrenees, the Alps, Caucasus, through to Siberia, Japan, Korea, etc. And the plants in Lofoten have been there for a long time, in particular on the island Vestvågøy. You can see large stands of it. And one theory is this was a plant that the Vikings brought with them from probably originating either in the Caucasus or in the Alps regions. And this wasn't discovered until about the 1970s in the Lofoten Islands by a botanist in Tromsø. And when you talk to people, this is an allée of Victory onion in this driveway. And you talk to people about, did you know this was a fantastic edible plant? And they've always grown it as just an ornamental. And when you tell them that it's an onion, they understand suddenly why it smells like onions when they're cutting the grass next to it. So it's quite funny. And this is the reconstruction onion garden at Borg in the middle of Vestvågøy, where they've planted both Siberian chives, Sibir gresslurk, and Seierslurk. Great perennial veg, which actually grows better in the north than in the south, but it's good that they've got some things that grow well, isn't it? and particularly in northern Norway. This is one definitely to go for. But it's still under good conditions, damp, fertile soil in the south. It will also grow very nicely, and you have a few coming on here.
Does it grow all the way up in Tromsø as well?
Yeah, it will grow in Tromsø. The botanical garden in Tromsø had the first, still has a kind of a national collection of Sayersløk, which is, I was bowled away when I first saw it. So Brunhild Mørkved, the botanist who discovered the stands in the Lofoten Islands, she collected from various places and also collected from other parts of the world, from Japan, from Caucasus, Georgia, and the Pyrenees, Alps, and with the idea to try and genetically compare them and find out where the Lofoten onions actually originated. So, yeah, it's an interesting, so some people call it the Viking onion, but we don't know for sure. We know that the Vikings cultivated onions in their gardens, but we don't know which ones. Probably there were many different varieties, mainly wild, including Ramsløk, Ramsons. Okay, that's the distribution in Norway. There's one isolated location on Granvindselven, but there was a connection. We believe it came from Lofoten on Jektafarten along the coast and naturalized into an island on a river which was very, very damp and ideal conditions for it to naturalize. But unfortunately, that particular stand of the onion is on the way out because they were regulating the river after some severe flooding, concrete walls, etc. So the island is gradually disappearing. But we've rescued some of the onions, so they're being cultivated. And in Japan again, plastic wrapped vegetables for you. But nice to see perennials in supermarkets. And this was an interesting one. I was on the train on the way up to the Lofoten Islands, and this was about 10 years ago. And I was using Google Street View on some gardens in the Lofotens, and I discovered Victory onion Sayersløk being grown in somebody's garden here. And you can see the huge stands of it here. This is all Sayersløk. In Rust, old garden. People just don't harvest it at that time. Yeah, that's from Granvindselven. Ramsløk, of course, is a great, we talked about introducing it down in the river here, or down in the part of the garden here. You need fairly damp, fertile soil, but it looked pretty good conditions for it, I would say. And it's a beautiful plant when it's in full flower as well. And you can, again, use everything. The flower stems, the flowers are great in salads or in stir-fries. So use everything. Well, not literally everything. If you take everything, then the plant's severely weakened, but so don't take all the leaves. But you can use the different parts to extend the harvesting season. So Ramsløk, Ramsons, it's a great one. As you can see here in salads, the white flowers, this is Ramsons. And the distribution in Norway. So definitely don't harvest from the wild in Østlandet and in Trøndelag. Don't know if it quite comes up here. Is that Hurdal? Maybe, almost. And in North America, they have a plant called ramps, which is a similar woodland plant, Allium trichocum. Although it looks superficially very similar to Ramsløk, it actually is quite distantly related. It's closer to Sayersløk in the huge Allium genus. There are over 900 species of Allium in the world, huge diversity. And this one is super popular in North America. They have big ramps, festivals for this one. But again, there are problems with over-harvesting, and actually Native American peoples have started cultivating this vegetable on a large scale on their reserves instead. Another one of my absolute favourites onions, which I've already talked about, is the nodding onion, which we saw. Andrew has a lot of this, so come back in a couple of weeks and it will be in full flower and looking really beautiful. There are all different colour forms, from white flowers, there are dwarf varieties, large varieties, purple, and very, very edible perennial veg and really quite, you have a patch also down in what's going to be the forest garden, and you said to me that it was growing better actually there in the shade than in the open area, and that could well be because in Norwegian it's called prairie lurk, or Chicago lurk I call it as well. Prairie lurk refers to the fact it grows on the prairie, and the prairie for a small plant like this is actually quite a shady place, so the tall grasses that are surrounding it all the time. So it's quite adapted to shady conditions as well. This one you should have if you don't already have it.
No, I've tried it. It won't stay.
Won't?
Well, not at the other farm, but here maybe.
Yeah, I should think it's not a problem at all in Trøndelag. So often grown in woodland gardens. So maybe in the shade it would work very well. But it's a lovely yellow-flowered allium from the mountains of Spain, which is also delicious. Sherpa onion I talked about outside, so we won't dwell on that. And these are my Nepalese friends I talked about. Allium nutans we talked about outside also, so I won't dwell on that either. Siberian onions. This is Norrland onion, which is a hybrid, very tall plant. You've got it somewhere, but we don't know exactly where. We're going to try and locate it eventually. Another not allium, moving on, that you can actually, the various lilies, Lilium genus, obviously not lily of the valley or Lilia conval, which is highly poisonous, but it has to be the genus Lilium. The bulbs of these plants are widely used in the Far East as a vegetable. It gives some carbohydrate in a forest garden. In particular, Martagon lily, which is very easy to grow with these yellow bulbs, is very much used in the Far East. They use them in stir-fry dishes, etc. Or even tiger lily, which is a tigerlilje, is a very common. This one is krøllilje in Norwegian, and this is David's lily, which is also a tasty perennial lily you could grow in a forest garden. Yeah, just a various collection of edimentals. I mentioned outside the concept of plants which were both edible and ornamental. My own word from about 2006, which has become popular, or prydsaker in Norwegian, prydgrønnsaker. And yeah, it's just a selection that I've already talked about for most of them. Tradescantia was another one. Yeah, I've talked about all the others. I'm also involved in this community garden at Vares Venne in Ranheim in Trondheim. And yeah. Okay. So this is a big community garden which was established again the same year that I took early retirement. I was invited to contribute, and over the years I've developed what has become known as the World Garden. It's a 12-meter diameter circular garden with a center point representing the North Pole and the various perennial vegetables distributed geographically around the North Pole. So down here you have Europe, here we have Japan, China, North America, and West Asia. So there are now, it's basically my book been translated into a formal garden, which I actually weed, whereas my own garden, we'll come back to that, it's become more of a nature reserve. But this has something like 200 perennial vegetables on display, open 24 hours, and designed to show off how beautiful growing food actually can be. I've got, just not really relevant down here, but we have garden tours with Trondheim Sopp- og Nyttevækstforbund, 28th of August, and in Uke, and I believe there's a KVANN samling at Stadsbygd. You're supposed to be coming over to, I'm not sure if we're going to Vara or to my own garden, but one of the two. Okay, now going on to the trees and bushes and woody climbers, which picked out some of my favourites here with edible leaves and flowers. And I should mention that this is the slope looking down from my house over, this would have been a couple of weeks ago with the apple trees in full flower. This whole slope down here was, when we moved in 1984, was a fruit orchard with both apples and pears and plums and cherries. Unfortunately, when I arrived, there were even more trees than there are today, and we started removing some of the birch trees, and this introduced honningsop, so I call it the honningsop orna, the years with honey fungus. And we got this rather aggressive honey fungus, which systematically killed more or less all the trees in my this orchard, which we had inherited. So the trees started dying, and well, what the hell do I do? And this was around about 2000, and I'd started propagating perennial plants, and particular trees and shrubs and edible, anything that was edible I could get hold of seed for. And I had all these young seedlings waiting for somewhere to go. So I made the decision to remove all the old trees which were infected by this honey fungus. And that entailed basically removing all the soil, but I have very shallow soils in my garden, no more than about 20 centimetres over a very fertile rock, which is called phyllite, which is a bit like slaty, breaks up very easily, but it's very fertile. And so it was relatively easy over a number of years to remove the old trees and remove all the roots, and hopefully remove the problem that wouldn't come back. And thankfully, 25 years on, I haven't seen honey fungus. A miracle, I would say. It should have come back somewhere, but it just hasn't. Anyway, touch wood before it starts happening. Anyway, so there were a number of years up to about 2005 when I started replanting that whole slope with a huge diversity of edible plants. And some of those I'll be talking about. There was lime, one of the best perennials with edible leaves, which we harvest when we remember anyway, we harvest the twigs in the winter and bring them indoors maybe in February to bring on an early crop of edible salad leaves, lime trees, lind in Norwegian. Other edible trees we're familiar with, rowan, which has this taste of almonds or mandel. Birch, of course, we all know about. You can make birch juice from the leaves. Hawthorn, and we have one tree that we bring in every winter. This is our oldest laurbar or bay tree, which we bring into an extension in the house and have outside in the summer. So we have plenty of bay leaves to harvest for cooking. Another climbing woody plant, old man's beard, is clematis vitalba, or tysk clematis in Norwegian, which traditionally, in particular in Italy, is one of the most often used spring vegetables, the young shoots, but they have to be cooked because it's otherwise a bit toxic. So you have to cook the young shoots, but it's also a fantastic vegetable. Let's see. Yeah, on the left of the shoots. Then we have my old devil's walking stick, Fondens spaserstock, Aralia elata. This is in the same genus as Udo, that giant vegetable, but this is a young tree. And the reason it's called devil's walking stick is because the young stems are covered with thorns. And this is growing on my steepest slope. And I remember one year I didn't really have proper shoes on and I slipped. And the immediate reaction is to reach out to the nearest tree. Yeah, I said more than fun. But in Japan, this is a super important supermarket food called taranoki. And it's these sort of young leaves, effectively, which are used in stir-fry and various other, in tempura in particular, in Japan. And again, packed for a supermarket in Japan. And there's also a variegated version of it, Aurea variegata, yellow variegated. This is another interesting one, actually from Alaska. This is Oplopanax horridus, or devil's club. Doesn't really have, we can call it djevelens klubbe in Norwegian, which grows in old-growth shady forest in Alaska, in damp places. Important food for bears when they come out of hibernation in the springtime, and Native Americans learned from the bears and started eating it. The young shoots are, whoops, what's happened to the picture? Okay, yeah, so it's harvested when the young shoots appear, and this is tempura made with these young shoots. Delicious. And there are many other plants in the ginseng family, Araliaceae, in kind of woody plants which are used in a similar way, the young shoots or leaves. Okay. A few years ago I did a talk for KVANN in Studio Tour Japan in 2016, domestication of wild food plants, sansai. I think probably there's a video of this somewhere, probably on KVANN's.
On KVANN's YouTube channel.
Is it? Okay, that's good. So if you want to learn more about this in Norwegian, then please go to KVANN's YouTube channel. But a few more from the study tour. Here they're growing Japanese pepper, or sansho, Xanthoxylum piperitum. Generally, it's the source of these red pepper spices, which you can often see in these mixed pepper or pepper mixes you can buy in supermarkets, but also super important in Japan, where they don't really use pepper, they use this instead. And this guy here, we visited this farm where they were cultivating the leaves, which were super important for decorating food. The Japanese like the food to look good. So, yeah, just some examples of that. So it was real gourmet food, if you like. Yeah, just some pictures. These are cuttings he'd taken. Yeah. Another genus where the young flower buds and flowers are used, magnolia, which are widely known, but most people are not aware of the edibility of magnolias. But in particular in the Far East, there are quite a few species of magnolia which are used in the springtime. An interesting taste, I would say, but have a taste next time you see a magnolia. It's interesting and not poisonous. Okay, moving on to trees, bushes and woolly climbers with fruit and berries, what you've all been waiting for, bit of sugar. And yeah, for us in Trøndelag, or in my gardens, fresh fruit and berries can be available all the way from late July to April, May the following year. And here we're talking, in my collections, probably 30, 40 different, we use 30, 40 different fruits and berries every year. And mainly fresh, but in the period from May, when the last apples in storage are eaten, then we go over to dried fruit leather. I'll show a picture of that in a minute. But the first berries, the end of June in Trøndelag, strawberries and haskaps, honeyberries, which have become popular in recent years. I first saw at the eco village, the forest garden in, what's it called, near to Malmö in Sweden. Forgotten the name. Anyway, they had huge berries there. This is 15, 20 years ago. So it's finally arrived in Norway. And we've planted something like 14 cultivars in the Vern, the community garden I'm involved with. And very popular with the bumblebees in early spring because they're flowering so early.
We have them here too.
Yeah. And they're growing them now commercially in Trøndelag. So that's an interesting one. So the berries are elongated, a bit like blueberries, but slightly larger. But you've got to get there before the birds. But good to share with the birds as well, isn't it? Raspberries in all different forms and colours come next, and so we're really looking forward to that. I think raspberry is my favourite berry, I must admit it. And they are fantastic. And then another one that's early is Nanking cherry, or Chinesis kirsebær, Prunus tomentosa, which I struggled a bit to grow at home, but I'm hopeful they will grow better at the community garden. Sour cherries, my favourite dried fruit. I just love the tang of dried sour cherries. I can't get enough.
Excuse me, Stephen, what is bilberry?
This is blåbær, sorry. Yeah.
Blueberry?
Blåbær is bilberry in English.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Can I ask you, which one was it that you served me that you told me when I had it in my mouth the seed was poisonous and I needed to spit it out?
I'll come back to that.
Barlind.
Barlind, yeah. Amelanchier, Saskatoon, Mispel.
Yeah, that one.
Widely planted and really productive and really tasty, but unfortunately it's become blacklisted in Norway, but it's gone far, it's everywhere. There are thousands of plants in Trondheim, for example. And so if you harvest it, then harvest it before the birds start spreading it, then you're doing a service. Hugely important berry for the Native Americans, of course. And my first conference I went to in Canada, I met a Welsh Canadian family who took me to their place and helped them to harvest Saskatoons in their garden. They had one of the new large fruited varieties which they were growing. So that prompted me to start growing myself about 40 years ago. So I have a number of different cultivars with larger berries. And they're beautiful plants as well. The autumn colour of the leaves is wonderful. It's kind of darkish reddish colour. And when it flowers in the springtime, it's also beautiful. So it's an amazing plant to have in a garden or in a hedge. Red currants or reeps. There are a huge variety of different forms. Here we have the white currant, wheat reeps, the conventional red one. This is black red currant or swart reeps from the Caucasus, which is a different species, Ribes petraeum, which we're growing at Vara. And then we have cultivated old and modern varieties of red currants, black currants, and gooseberries. So both solbær and stikkelsbær. In addition, just a few examples. This is also a reeps, pink champagne with these pinkish And I don't know why, but of all the berries that we were growing, over 300 different berries and fruits at this community garden, the only ones so far that people have come and asked for cuttings of are this pink champagne red currant. So I've had about 5 people ask me for cuttings of it. Nothing else. What is it about pink champagne? Anyway, and we'll even have the green blackcurrant. So it's a solbar which never gets black, but is ripe in with a green colour. There are various of these mutations that have cropped up in various gardens in Norway over the years. And then we have fantastic new for us in Trøndelag bjørnebær, blackberry, called Sonja, which is totally hardy. So up until this variety came along, you had to lay them down and cover in the winter because they just weren't hardy. But this one is amazing, and really productive and tasty as well. So that's a new revolution up with us. And you have Worcesterberry, which is a different species looks a bit like Jostebar or black zwart stickersbar, but is later and actually can be harvested right the way up to the first severe frosts in October. In Trøndelag, at least, it's earlier further south. And then we have black raspberry, Svartbringebær, Rubus occidentalis from North America, which is also a fantastic fruit, which complements ordinary raspberries or bringebær in that it ripens somewhat later. So it's a nice one to have if you want to be self-sufficient in fresh fruit. And you've got thimbleberries from North America, Rubus odoratus and Rubus parviflorus. Rubus odorata is known as rosebar in Norwegian, is grown as an ornamental. Often you never see berries on it because you have to have 2 different varieties to get the berries. And most people who are growing it are not aware that it's a berry plant even, and really good berries. So, yeah. And yeah, there's just a few more pictures of it. And I quite like Douglas's hogthorn. Douglas is hawthorn from North America, quite tasty blackberries. Important again for the Native Americans as a food plant. And then you've got this curiosity, the strawberry raspberry, jordbærbringebær, which tastes of nothing, unfortunately. Okay, we'll pass on there, but it looks good in the salad. And people get a bit disappointed. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I've lost that one now. So and then we have various mulberries, which these are all ripening in Trøndelag. So although the Morris alba, the white wheat morbær, it was 15 years before I could harvest them. And unfortunately, I'd planted it on the steepest slope in my garden. I didn't think at the time that I was having to reach up about 10 meters to where the berries were. So, and it's dangerous on a ladder on a steep slope, so it's the birds that get them. So I've started pruning it to bring it down a bit, so hopefully it will be reachable eventually. And yeah, this is also a curiosity that I really like, is the Kusa dogweed, Korea cornel, Cornus kusa. There's these curious fruits. Again, not the best taste, but they're really cool looking. And also golden currant, gulrips. We've got 2 or 3 varieties of this, both black with blackberries and also with orange berries. There are quite a few different cultivars, but difficult to get in Norway. I think you guys at Efrus and yourself, Rick, are selling these now. I think I got one from you this winter. Yeah. Mm. So this is a good place to go as well for your perennials. And Andrew, of course. got loads of KVANN plants out here.
I do, yeah.
Angelica. Marcus Tagan. KVANN is a heirloom Norwegian, and we're looking for people to look after it for the society KVANN. So please get in touch with Andrew afterwards if you're interested.
It's our flag symbolic plant, and you need to have about 30 plants for it to be, not lose genetic diversity. So it's it's a 2-year project. Just reach out if you have space and time.
It's a tastier, the variety is tastier in that the stems are filled almost totally with flesh rather than having a hole in the middle, so that the slightly bitter taste of young Angelica leaves are modified, or they're spread over a bigger volume and therefore taste sweeter to us. So definitely worth preserving. Tinver, sea buckthorn, hippophae, a native, of course, in Norway, grows in Trøndelag in various nature reserves, and there are a number of modern varieties which are coming on the market. Nitrogen fixing, which is a big advantage, so can be quite productive, and one of the most highest vitamin C content berries out there. And this is a very close relation to sølbusk, or autumn olive, Eleagnus umbellata. And there's a story related to Hyrdal with these plants that we have at Vara, because they came from, I think they bought the plants from Eferus at the time. They have this field out here with lots of berry bushes behind the fence to keep the deer out, and there are a lot of. I think they bought a few hundred of these, because somebody in the eco village was growing. I remember was growing sølbusk, and it was producing ripe berries every autumn, and they were delicious. So they were inspired to start growing on a bigger scale. But unfortunately, shit happened, and the farm was sold, wasn't it? Yeah, and they had to give up this fantastic garden, and it's absolutely terrible. I saw it today, that it is not being looked after and it's just lying there unused. But I helped them to get to source plants at that time, and they gave me a few plants which were planted at Vara, and they're growing incredibly well. And the big advantage in Trøndelag with these is that they are very late ripening. So these were harvested in the middle of October. Even after some frosts, they were totally undamaged, and the birds didn't seem to be, or they hadn't discovered them yet. And I really like, Meg makes this fruit leather from them, which I really like, the kind of slightly sour taste, a bit like sour cherry of these berries, although they are a bit seedy. I quite like it. And there's also gumi, which is another species which I haven't got a lot of experience with yet. I have this one variety which comes from the Soviet Union area, although it was seed propagated, so I don't know how close it is to the original. But in recent years, we've planted a number of these in the same area, so hopefully there will be bigger yields. Another one is cornelian cherry, vårkornel, one of the first flowers in the spring of the yellow flowers of the vårkornel, Cornus mas. And traditionally, the berries were really a bit too late to ripen properly, in my garden anyway. And but then I discovered that you can use these unripe berries to make something they call Polish olives, polska oliven. So they use the same kind of technique as real olives. So I thought, wow, that's cool. Maybe I do want them green and not red. But nevertheless, there's something called the cornelian cherry growers in the USA who are completely mad about cornelian cherries. And they had sourced a number of varieties from Eastern Europe where there were breeding programs, and I asked them, could you send me seed of a number of varieties which were really early, or the earliest varieties. So those we're now growing at Vara. It'll be a few years before we know the results, but that's quite exciting. Elegant, Nytteplanter, etc. This is a nice variegated variety that you can get as an ornamental. Most of our fruit is dried over a wood fire, although nowadays we're not using this rather dangerous fire risk frame above the wood stove, but we have a metal frame a bit elevated to the right of the fire there. So most of the fruit in the autumn months is dried in that way. But in the winter it's mainly apples, and in particular aroma, which I absolutely love. Really productive, tasty, and dries very well. And at this time of year, just now in June, we've now gone over to the dried fruit, and until the first haskaps are available in a few weeks. So that was a quick rundown of fruits, plums as well, of course, various dried fruit. Svenska plommer is an old Trøndisk variety of plum, prune plum, literally translated, blackcurrants, aronia, bilberries, and you can make fruit leather with mixes of all the different varieties which are available at one time. A bit akin to the mixed salads that I make. You can make mixed fruit salads or mixed fruit leathers, and they all have their unique taste at different times depending on what's available. So it's all about seasonal food. And the storage cupboard. A curiosity is the paper mulberry, Papier moorbaar, which to my Brucinetia papyrifera, the first time I saw it was in a botanical garden in Hawaii, of all places. And one of these mistakes that you do, you forget a plant out in the garden over the winter, and then you come back in the springtime, you discover it's still alive and perfectly healthy. And this is what happened with this plant here. Commonly grown across the South Pacific Islands and hardy in Trøndelag. What's going on here? I couldn't understand it. And it turns out the origin of this plant, which has these lovely mulberry-like leaves and edible drupes, kind of small berries, which are really, really delicious, is that this plant originated in northern China, where it was quite a cold winter climate. And so I just discovered this so for about 10 years, I had one of these in my garden, and it didn't freeze at all. And then it flowered and died. Don't know why. It's very sad. I gave one to Ringve, but they lost theirs too. So anyway, it's more hardy than we believe. In fact, New York has they're using a lot of this as a street tree. But it's mainly used to make bark fiber for making clothing in the South Pacific. So it's a traditional plant. But the berries are also, if you can get to that stage, then are also delicious. That was from Kew Gardens, I think, in London. And another curiosity, the blue sausage fruit, or blå belg. Again, a bit disgusting tasting, but they look wonderful. So I add these kind of disgusting things in salads, to surprise people. So be a bit careful if you come to dinner. Blue sausage fruit. And this is the one you were talking about, yew or barlind. I've planted a barlind right up to next to the kitchen window, in winter, and then the flowers come in the early spring, almost don't notice them, and then these big red drupes, berries come in the autumn, which are totally edible as long as you don't eat the seeds, which are highly toxic. So therefore, when I'm serving people breakfast with a big P for poison, it was a good question. Yeah, thanks for that. Then, anyway, I don't eat it. They're delicious, actually, by the way. They really are sweet and good tasting. But yeah, you've got to be very careful. And well, they say that even if you swallow a seed, it goes right the way through. But I'm not taking that risk. Yeah, another fantastic bush with edible fruit is berberis. This is a wild plant in my area. In fact, there's quite a big stand of it on the other side of the bay. And I have one old plant in my garden, which could be a wild plant. It's in the wild part of the garden. It has these lovely yellow flowers in the springtime, and the birds absolutely love, and particularly the waxwings, sedum swans, redwings, red-winged tross. They love the berries in the autumn, these red berries. And I have a black-berried variant of it, which was seed propagated many years ago. And the taste of the berries is lemony. And in that way, so we dry the berries. There was one year when we had a big crop, and the waxwings, the sedum swans, I would usually let them have some of the berries. But they didn't turn up that year. So we decided to harvest them because I'd read that the dried berries were very important in Iranian cuisine. And they make a powder from the berries, and then they sprinkle it on rice. So this is called Iranian Jeresh Pulao, berberis rice. So it gives a kind of a zing to, so it's kind of like an alternative to lemons. So I never buy fruit at the supermarket. So no lemons, no bananas, none of that, oranges or anything like that. All my fruit and berries is from my own activity. And this is the best lemon replacement that I've come up with so far. And one of the dishes I found on the internet was Persian frittata, which is an egg dish, cuckoo. And also, not sure what that was now. And I looked up the ethnobotanical literature about how these berries were used. And in Iran, there are big areas where they cultivate berberis and it turns out it's the same species as we have as a wild plant in Norway, vill berberis. And in the ethnobotanical record, if you look at that in the Czech Republic, children would eat the berries as snack food. Estonia, it was the spice for fermenting cucumbers. Slovakia, they ate the young shoots raw in spring or added to sauces. Bulgaria, fruit added to soups as a sour taste. And Turkey, used fresh or dried. And in the Basque Country, young shoots are eaten. So both the shoots and the berries can be used of Berberis vulgaris are native. But I've not really come across it being used amongst the Nytteplanter people. Another one, staghorn sumac, which is also we call lemonade bush, also has a zing to the berries in the winter. I didn't have a picture of the fruit, obviously, but they're kind of reddish. They stand all winter. And you basically take the clusters of fruit, put them in water, and leave it in the water for some time. You get a refreshing lemonade type drink. Nut trees, semberifuru, different pine nuts, which we've planted various species at the community garden. And in my own garden, I've actually had this bird, the Siberian nutcracker, caching the nuts of semberifuru, sember pine, which was widely planted in Trøndelag in the 1970s, and is now at an age that it's producing a lot of nuts. And there was a big invasion of this Siberian nutcracker species, which usually lives in Siberia, in early 2000s. And today we have a local community of this in Trøndelag that breeds also in Trøndelag, because they discovered their food plant was here, so they didn't need to do this big migration. So that's really cool. And I've seen them, they also eat hazelnuts, and I have hazel in my garden. So I've seen them coming to get the hazel, and they cache the sembrifuru in my garden, and as a result, I have a 15-year-old sembrifuru in my garden, planted by the birds. Thank you, I say. So this was the first fruit, the first nut we got in the garden from this. Walnuts, of course. I had no idea whether walnuts would grow in my area. Over 20 years ago now, I got hold of a nut of what was called botanically Euglans cathayensis, or Chinese walnut, which I think is a synonym of Manchurian walnut, the most hardy of all the walnuts. But nevertheless, after only 10 years from a walnut, I had ripe walnuts in my garden in Trøndelag, a place I'd never have thought to grow walnuts. I didn't think it was possible. And now the tree is 20 years old and produces loads of nuts every year, but unfortunately the nuts are quite small and tedious to extract the meat from. But it showed that under my conditions I could grow walnuts. So at the community garden now, we've planted many different varieties, both of common walnut, walnut, Euglans regia, but altogether 10 different varieties and species of the community garden as a kind of a research project to see what happens. Both heart nuts, butternuts, black walnuts, different types of hickory, pecan. Probably only a few of these will actually survive and give anything, but then we know that it's not possible. But yeah. Hazel, of course, as well. We have 11 varieties of hazel, mainly sourced from Ephorus. Different large varieties with large nuts. This is the wild one, which grows wild in my garden and locally. Great plant for the early spring. And also, to my surprise, a chestnut tree, Edelkastania, which I planted in my garden 15 years ago, is now flowering and producing nuts. But I think the season is a bit too short. This was just a wild chestnut from southern England that I started a nut from. But it's never frozen, even in a really cold winter, the worst winter ever in Trøndelag in 2011, it survived. So it's worth trying these things. And then we have the North American Castania dentata. We have a lovely tree at the Botanical Gardens in Trondheim, but just one of them, so there'll never be nuts because they need two to produce. Unlike the Manchurian walnut, one is enough, produces both male and female. Sorry, that's walnut, but this chestnut needs more than one. It flowers away, but needs a partner. It irritates me a bit at botanical gardens that often you just get one specimen and therefore there'd be no fruit or anything to do. Anything interesting, you know. Well, that's the largest chestnut I've seen, which is at Rosendal in Hardanger. Fantastic old tree, which I think is several hundred years old. Bladder nuts is another favourite. This is the European species Staphylia pinnata at home. Produces, the nuts are a bit of a waste of time. They are tasty, a bit like pistachio nuts, but there are a lot of preparation to get out the flesh. But the most interesting thing are the young shoots and the flowers, which are really tasty in the springtime of all Staphylia, bladder nut, nut species and varieties. Unfortunately, I accidentally cut mine down in the winter, and I don't even have a chainsaw. It's easy with a chainsaw, but I was just using a handsaw, and somehow I cut down the wrong thing. Anyway, it's shooting again from the base. And there are many different species, North American ones. Yeah, I think, what's the time?
Yeah, we're 10 over.
10 over already, so I'll very quickly go through the last ones. Various living room plants, this is when I'm an old man, I'm going to have this flowering beside my bed, because I have one in my living room, and but it needs to be allowed to go through the roof. Anyway, it's a nut tree from Australia in my living room. Coffee, of course you have to have your coffee every day. We could talk about coffee for ages. Coffee tea is a thing, by the way. That's the most interesting product from your homegrown coffee tree, because you can make tea from coffee, from the leaves. And it's very tasty and full of caffeine as well, so thank you. Moringa. Yeah, I have my figs indoors. This is the Bornholm fig. Produces every year. Some I haven't succeeded with yet. This one you remember. There's Andrew with Norway's largest monkey puzzle tree. I've tried numerous times, even though there are a number of good trees in Trøndelag. This is at Vanviken, quite near to where you live, Jørgen. And there's one also in Leksvik on the other side of the fjord, which is climatically a little bit warmer than on my place on the south side of the fjord. But I've had as a Christmas tree a Brazilian monkey puzzle, Araucaria angustifolia, for many years, unfortunately dead now. But that was cool while it lasted. And I have tried repeatedly to overwinter. This was the last attempt. It survived one winter, died the next. So, but the nuts are really tasty, but I'm going to have to live to 130 to taste one, probably, at this rate. This is the guy that has Norway's northernmost monkey puzzle in Tromsø, or had. This is Vern at his nursery outside of Tromsø. My biggest garden surprise ever, to find a monkey puzzle growing at the latitude of Tromsø. Unfortunately, it died after, but it had reached quite a height. Actinidia, you have some actinidias, hardy kiwis in the allium garden over the arches. They can be quite big plants. This is actually the real kiwi that I planted from a seed from the supermarket many years ago, and another plant that I forgot out in the garden. In the spring it was still alive, and now it's almost 40 years old. So it flowers profusely but needs a partner. So if anybody's got any pollen of real kiwi, let me know and we'll arrange a meet-up. But you also need probably 3 months of over 20 centigrade for fruit to form and mature. So
the one behind, is that also mini kiwi?
Yeah, that's another one. Yeah, Actinidia columicta. Sorry, I mixed up. This is the same one that they grow in New Zealand and commercially. But the one at the back is a mini kiwi. But again, it's lacking a partner. I planted two, and one. It's happened repeatedly to me that my kiwi love affair or attempts at kiwi love matching has not worked.
You can take a stickling from me and then bring me a stickling from you and see. Maybe.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but we've got more on the way. And then tuna, the Chinese tun tree, which has leaves that taste a bit meaty apparently. I don't eat meat, but a bit meaty, oniony. It's one I've tried several times. I've got some on the go again. So this is a tree in the botanical garden in Göteborg. They've got a huge tree, so it's we're not far from the climate that makes it possible. Have you got this at Vestfold? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Did you get it from seed?
Those were I don't know. Somebody in Trondheim gave me a couple of trees the last time, but I have started from trees as well, from seed, and got it to a certain stage, and then it doesn't overwinter for some reason. Anyway, and in China they cultivated the kind of a cut and come again. They let them grow to about 3 or 4 meters, harvest, and then cut and let it come again. So it's a big commercial thing. This is flamingo, which is an ornamental version of tuna. Persimmons I've not succeeded with, nor pawpaw, I've tried them. I've got a friend in Trondheim who's just bought, I think, 10 different varieties. So people are desperate to have pawpaws in their gardens. Did you ever succeed?
Yeah, I did, but I never got fruit.
No fruit, no.
So I sent them down to Randy down in Balder.
Oh yeah, so they had those ones, yeah. Shisander, I've not really, they just grow really slowly, as does goji with me. Just don't seem to grow. They don't die, but they don't grow either. Some issue there. Smilax species related to asparagus, are used for the young shoots. I've tried several of these. The only one that survived, I didn't even know it had survived. I cut it down before I realized it was there, but it is a perennial and it's come back again. So I haven't given up with that one. So it's a climber, perennial climber. Akebia is another one I tried for many years. It grew really profusely against my south-facing wall, really flowered itself. Again, I planted 2, one survived, but I showed that it was possible. These are the flowers, rather pretty. And it actually climbed right up to my roof. People were saying, what are you growing that's coming out of your bedroom up there, you know? But actually it was an akebia that had gone right under the cladding of the house and appeared right at the top of the house. And then the plant suddenly died. And I was left with this dead piece of vegetation. Anyway, it's a good story. I finally got to taste one in North America. A bit of a waste of time. No, they're very tasty. Ginkgo, again, a friend of mine's, I was talking to her about ginkgo and she said, oh, I've got one. After 10 years, it's only as high as me. And I said, mine is 20 years old and it's up here. You know? So they grow really, they don't freeze out or anything, but they just grow really slowly. And I'm not sure I really want the fruit because they smell of vomit. In this lady, this is a leading forager who's unfortunately died now, Leda Meredith. She took me around Central Park in New York foraging and showed me the ginkgo trees there, which the Asiatic people are absolutely crazy over because they eat the seeds, the nuts. Ginkgo nuts are very popular. And she could tell me that the streets of New York, where they've planted a lot of these, really smell of vomit during the fruiting season. It's a very important street tree. Ginkgo nuts in an Asiatic. And Central Park, New York, the crop waiting to rot. Yeah. Another one, Myrike, related to bog myrtle or pors, which we find in bogs in Norway, which is more of a flavouring. I have one in my garden, which is now about 20 years old. It survives, but again, doesn't grow very, very quickly. As does kverde or quince. That's also a very slow growing and probably the season's too short. But my kverde, again, which is about 15 years old, it flowers and flowers, but never really produces much of a fruit. It's too short season.
But the firekins works really good.
Yeah, like the
taste of lemon.
Yeah, so japonica, the Canameles japonica, which is the Japanese quince. Yeah, can be really good. Yeah, so they're totally hardy and produce berries. Yeah, fruits. And I have at the community garden. I've got some new varieties from Estland, which are supposedly even better. So we'll see. But they're seed propagated. Some of the best forest gardens I've visited. I never got to visit Robert Hart in his famous forest garden. He wrote a book in 1997 about forest gardening, which I did read, but it didn't really sink in that was what I was doing at the time. But I read the book, and actually there was the perennial vegetables were a bit boring, I thought, in the book. So I kind of skipped a lot of it, and so it was a long time later I realized what a pioneer this guy had been. Other favorites, Food Forest Ketelberg in Netherlands, which I visited now about 11, 12 years ago when it was right at starting. So it really has changed a lot since that time, providing a lot of food for leading restaurants in the Netherlands. Yeah, they're organising a food forest symposium in September, I believe. There's Martin Crawford's forest garden in England, which I visited a couple of times in the 2000s, about 20 years ago now. A great place. And then there's Holme, which is one of the oldest in Scandinavia, down near Malmö, Lund, which has a great collection, one of the oldest, more mature gardens. And you mentioned earlier Tycho and Carolina at Freeland, the eco community in Denmark. They have both a fantastic house, but also a fantastic forest garden around their house. Definitely worth a visit. Again, I haven't been there for a few years now. Of course, Erik, our dear Erik in Hardanger, with his vertical forest garden. Definitely worth a visit. And yeah, my two favorites in North America or around the world is Joe Hollis's mountain gardens in North Carolina that I was lucky enough to visit a couple of years before he died, sadly. Oh wow, Paradise Gardens, it really was paradise. Absolutely amazing place, and man with knowledge, and wow, I was just blown away by this place, the enormity of it, the size of the trees, walnuts and heart nuts and all these kind of things. And similar experience with Matthew Van Boolen's Feral Farm, forest garden in the middle of the forest, hidden away so that nobody could, he's a prepper, nobody could find this forest garden. So he has all his food being grown in this place. This is Japanese ginger growing there, and the heart nut trees are towering above him all over the place. So these two are real heroes of mine in North America. Okay, I think we'll skip the last bit about forest garden for biodiversity. I'll just show you a few pictures and you can guess what I'm going to be talking about. Just the importance of forest gardening for the biodiversity around us. And when COVID came along and I had more time on my hands, I stopped all the stupid traveling around the world and had time to go deep into my own garden and start registering all the insects that were around me, and I was just completely bowled away with what was around me and the very importance of plants like nettles for the biodiversity, with over 50 different moth species whose larvae feed on nettles, not only some of the most colourful butterflies and a huge number of other. So these are all butterflies and moths that have been photographed in my garden, whose larvae will feed on nettles. And they're so beautiful as well. And I didn't see, before I started searching, I didn't really see what I was sharing my place with. And this kind of in-depth searching into my own garden led me to decide to, in the past I had all this control over my garden, and when you have control, you're kind of, you're controlling everything, you're above it in some way. But if you let go of that control and release yourself into your garden, you can become much more part of it. It sounds a bit corny, but when I did that and stopped all the weeding and trying to keep a big collection of 2,000 plants, which needs a lot of effort, and rather concentrated on the plants which will always be there because they're strong. And they're the ones that are producing the food after all. And then I was sucked into my own ecosystem, in a way. I was feeling much more part of it than when I was controlling from above. And so that's been a really interesting experience. So both learning the names of all the creatures that I'm sharing my place with, and being able to do something which inevitably I would have happened anyway. I'm getting a bit older now, so eventually I'm going to lose that control. So why not do it deliberately and see what would happen if I'm not there, or not giving that control over all the plants. So that's basically what has happened. At the same time, I've still just got control over the world garden, the community garden, and the botanical garden. So much of my collections have been moved there, and my own garden has been much more important as a place where I'm happy, and where all my friends in the insect world and all the other organisms are happy too. And ultimately the birds as well, of course, which I started with back in the 80s. So yeah, that's basically it. Dandelions, yeah, I won't start on them. But share with the birds and share with the insects, and be happy with your gardening, and everything will be all right. These are all moths that I've found in my garden, which are dependent on willow, sallow, or celia, probably the most important plant to have in a forest garden, even though it's not edible. It's so important for the biodiversity, both the bees, the wild bees in the spring, and a huge range of moths in addition, that are driving the whole ecosystem, the spring ecosystem. When the migratory birds arrive in our part of the world in the middle of May, all the insects are feeding on the sallow and the celia. So it's all interconnected. And it's just so, it's wonderful for me, having started as a young man who was interested in nature, to actually end up as an older man who is now understanding what I've created without deliberately, trying to improve the biodiversity in some way. So all about the birds and the bees, and the plants in particular, which are combination plants, what I call entomentals, ento for entomology and AV for the birds. So birds which are both beautiful to look at for us, they're food plants, and they're also great for the pollinating insects and other insects. What's not better than that? And there are even thistles, for example, with tuberous roots, which are quadruple use plants, also provide edible seeds, oil-rich seeds for the birds in the winter. So they're my favourites, most useful. Okay, that's me. The end. Thank you.